Hi guys, welcome to your next class. This class is inspired by an artist named Henri Matisse, and he started an interesting style using bright colors and simplified forms. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna recreate what Matisse did with our still life, just really simplified shapes for everything. And we're gonna use really bright colors. The supplies you're going to want to get out for this is your mystery bag, your scissors, get your directions out, your mixed media paper, a pencil, your sketchbook, a glue stick that was included, construction paper, and then, of course, the still life that you set up. When you guys are ready to go, get your sketchbook out and play with simplifying these forms. So before we were doing a lot of shading and making the forms look 3D. Now we're going to just make it really simple. And I want you to just try to see everything outlined, including the shadow. Look at these forms in a very simplified way. Draw those out, do a little dissection to kind of see what those shapes are made up of, and then we can get started creating our composition. So I opened up my mystery bag, and I had a whole variety of colors and fun patterns, and I'm really excited to use them in my projects because they're all very different. I then took out my mixed media paper and I drew out my shapes. This is basically your blueprint. So you're going to draw out your shapes, and then we're going to cut these shapes out to use as a stencil to cut into our construction paper. So you'll see what I mean in a little bit. What I want you to do is draw it very simplified so that it's easy to cut out. Okay, when you finish those objects, I want you to put that sheet of paper aside and get another mixed media piece of paper, and we're going to try to create our background where these shapes are going to be. So I wanted to try out a couple different things using the construction paper I had and the stuff in my mystery bag. And I tried out creating like a two-tone table surface, one like half of it pink, half of it red, and then I made the background all yellow because all of my shapes could sit on top of that table surface. And then I tried a different one where I made an illusion using negative space to create a back wall. So I folded part of the paper to create an angle that looks like one side of the table. And then I took another piece of paper and matched it up and folded that side to the same point. And now putting those two pieces of paper on that mixed media sheet of paper creates a background wall illusion. And it looks like there's a white table. So that's called negative space. You can do that and put all of your objects on that table. And you can decorate the wall background. So I took some of my black paper from my mystery bag and I used a little salt shaker and used that as a stencil to create some dots. And then I even cut one of those dots in half and put it on the top and the bottom to kind of create the illusion that the circles go off, the dots go off the side. Then I wanted to create stripes on the opposite side of the wall, and I used a little bit of my green paper, and I matched that angle by folding the paper to match the orange paper. And after I had that crease, I cut it, and so it had the same angle. And then I was able to divide them into little stripes and put them on the paper. So there's a background, and you can glue this on at this point before we go back to our objects. So now we're going back to our objects, our blueprint, and we're going to be cutting out every single shape, including the shadow. So you really want to make sure you cut out the shadow shapes too. And we're going to lay these on top of the different color papers that we want these objects to be. So I chose a little brown paper for my box. I cut out the shadow and I put that aside. And then I made sure to trace the shape in the very corner of my paper to make sure I'm very economical and I don't use up too much paper. You guys have half sheets of construction paper, so you definitely want to get it all the way in the corner to cut it out. So I had a whole purple sheet of paper and I decided to use this for my background to make it simple for you guys to see. But remember, you guys are doing your background first on your mixed media sheet of paper. Okay, then I went and traced my shadow. I decided that my shadows would all be red. I traced it out, and I didn't trace it exactly because I wanted to have extra. So see, my shadow was kind of too slim and I wanted some extra to make it a little easier. So there's my shadow. Then I cut out my apple and the apple shadow from my blueprint. And I trimmed out the shadow shape after that. Again, I added some extra so that it'd be easier to stick it because we're going to glue all these pieces together. Don't do any gluing yet. We don't need to glue until the very end. And then I traced out my apple shape, and I wanted to create a shadow for my apple as well. So I put my little piece up against my apple blueprint and I trimmed it, and then it fit really well inside the apple. Then I cut out the stem of my apple, and I wanted to use a color that was really fun. So I have my shape, and it's gonna look like that. And then I took one of my crazy cool patterns from the mystery bag, and I traced out my stem and cut it out. And I tried to cut it out in an area of the paper that I liked. And then I was done. I got my stem on my apple, I got my shadow on my apple, and that was all finished. After that, I worked on my box. I cut out the different sides of the box that are going to fit on top of my box shape. So this is the real dissection part, where first you start with the whole shape, and now you simplify it and take different kinds of paper that add some interesting patterns to the shape. And I labeled my blueprint because I don't want to lose the parts. I felt like I would really confuse these particular sides of the boxes, so I labeled them so that I remember which is which. For one side, I chose a very interesting pattern, and for my front side, I chose some kind of red paper. And again, I just cut out from the corner because I don't want to use up the whole paper or cut in the very center. I'll probably use that paper again in the future. So now I have my two shapes done, my box and my apple, and now I'm going to work on my toilet paper blueprint. So I'm cutting out my toilet paper, including the shadow. Make sure you always cut out the shadow too. And I chose yellow, so I cut out my toilet paper from the yellow paper. And I then cut out my shadow shape from my blueprint. And I went back to my red paper that I was using for my shadows and traced it out. Gave myself a little extra for my shadow. And then I placed it to see how it fits. And remember, I'm not gluing anything yet. I'm just organizing, trying to think about how I want these shapes to look. For the top, the toilet paper has a hole. So I decided to cut out the shape of that hole, and I wanted to use the same fun pattern that I used on my apple stem. So I traced it out, cut it out, and then I placed it on top of the toilet paper, and now it really looks like a toilet paper roll just by adding that one simple shape. I still felt like the toilet paper could use a little detail, so for that front sheet of toilet paper that's kind of coming off the side, I decided to cut that out and grab some tissue paper. I have some orange tissue paper in my mystery bag, and I traced it out and cut it out and placed that on top of the toilet paper, and it fit pretty well. So once you have all of these shapes figured out, then you can start to glue. After I glued my background, I worked on the object closest to the back. So that was my box. My box is glued next, and all of the shapes on my box. And then what do you think goes in front of the box? My apple. So the next thing I did was my apple shape. And whenever I glue, guys, I really glue all the way up to the edge. And so I hold the paper in my hand and I glue all the way to the edge of each paper. And I try not to glue it on my background paper because the glue kind of could stick and look dirty. So I hold the glue in my hands and I really press the paper against the glue all the way up to the edge, trying to get as much glue on there as I can to make sure it sticks and it doesn't curl back up. And once I finished my apple and gluing all of my pieces onto my apple, then I moved on to the toilet paper shape that I made. I started with the shadow, trying to think of what layers need to go first. So the shadow needs to go first, then the toilet paper, then my toilet paper hole, and after the toilet paper hole, then I did my sheet of toilet paper on top, my little orange tissue paper sheet. Now, tissue paper is very hard to glue without ripping it. So what I recommend you do, if you're going to use tissue paper, make sure you glue the object first, not the tissue paper. So I glued on top of the toilet paper shape where I'm going to stick it, and then I carefully started on the edge and I smoothed it on a little bit at a time onto the toilet paper with my finger, because I didn't want there to be too many wrinkles, and I had to be very careful in order to just carefully slide that on. So, finishing touches, I really should have worked on my background first. I tried to do stripes for my background, so what I did was just glue my little stripes, I organized them, and cut off the excess after I glued them down. Once you're done gluing all of your pieces together, you've written your name on the back of your project, then you can start to clean up. What I did was I took all of my large scrap pieces and I collected them together and I put them back into my mystery bag just in case if I want to use this construction paper for a later project. It's always nice to have extra supplies. If the scrap papers are really chopped up and you can't get much out of them, I put those in the trash can, and I made sure I capped my glue stick really well. I don't want my glue stick to dry out. And then I just put away all my supplies and organized myself, getting ready for my next project. I hope you guys had fun working on this project and learning a little bit about Matisse, and I can't wait to see what you guys made.